Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And we are on January 15th, 2043. We've had a relatively quiet off season, basically spent most of the money we were going to have to spend re-upping with some of our own players as we try to get this team back into the playoffs once again next year, this upcoming season, for a 16th consecutive playoff appearance. We'll see whether or not we can achieve that. I think in some ways the team is getting a little long in the tooth, but we were a 99-win team last season that made it to Game 7 of the NLCS. So we're still expecting us to ultimately be a pretty competitive team when all is said and done. And appreciate the thoughts on what we should perhaps consider doing here in international amateur free agency from DLL 1B14. And I don't know, is that DLL first baseman number 14? Not sure exactly if there's any hidden messages in that moniker. And also thanks YMe943 for your thoughts on what we should do. Both agreed that Juan Luis, 17-year-old, is someone to certainly think about, who was not one of the players we highlighted last time, and I completely agree with this. Has the potential to really be something special, and he could even be a starter if that changeup developed. But even if that changeup doesn't develop, looks like he could be a pretty interesting right-handed reliever if everything goes well. Does have a high work ethic, 17 years old, and he's already throwing in the mid-90s. And he's supposedly only looking for $140,000. So I think that was a great recommendation by DLL and YME, and we'll certainly be investigating him. Luis Garza is the pitcher that we were most interested in. YME943 brought up the point. It's a lot of money, and he's already fragile at 17 years old. Might not be the best way to spend the money. One guy who was highlighted, if I could figure out what I want to do here and go to all batters. One guy who was highlighted by DLL 1B14 was Arrieta, the center fielder, who I do think I like. He kind of suggested that if there was one player he would go for, would probably be Arrieta among the five-star prospects, and there's only a handful of them, or more accurately, less than a handful of them. I do like Arrieta's durability, like his excellent outfield range, decent speed. He can bunt, and looks like he could be a pretty useful left-handed bat. He's also barely 16 years old, so lots of room for him to grow. Ignacio Botello, right fielder, somewhat less interested in him. He's got the potential incredible home run power. The question is whether he'll make enough contact and strike out infrequently enough to overcome that. Also not a particularly interesting defensive player. Gilberto Sandoval, interesting second baseman. The issue is, to me, he's not really an infielder, and the bat is not incredible. I mean, I guess it is. If it fully develops and you've got a guy with 75 contact and 65 home run power, that's a pretty darn useful bat. But we don't know his personality. We know he doesn't have much speed, not great defensively. I think I agree with DLL 1B14 that if we were going to go after one of these guys, it would certainly be Arrieta. Garza, who we already talked about, is the other five-star prospect. Those of you who have watched me over the years know that I really like pitching prospects. Strong pitching has been a big part of what we've built these Buffalo Wings around. Like his work ethic and his stamina, and if the curve or the changeup develop, he could be a useful starter. If both the curve and the changeup develop to the extent that we think they could, then he is a potentially incredible starter. The issue is how many games he's going to pitch in what shape he's going to be in physically 4 or 5 years from now when he might be a candidate for the major leagues. So both DLL and YME suggested it might be the year to spread the money around on a lot of players, given that the top end is not incredible. I do think I agree with that in principle, but what I'm going to do at the start is just try to shock and awe with a couple of guys, maybe come a little higher than what they're looking for, and try to maybe pick up a couple guys at the higher end of this year. If, as expected, those higher end guys end up looking for every penny we have to spend and or more pennies than we have to spend, then I probably will pivot to a more diversified effort this year. And Arrieta is my favorite of the position players, looking for $2 million. League interest in him is very high. Our relationship is also very strong. I don't think we're going to land him with a preemptive offer, but I am going to make him a $2.25 million offer, so that's $250,000 or 12.5% higher than what he's reportedly looking for. So we'll go ahead and submit that offer to him. I tend to think he's going to come back to us in about a week and say, hey, I've got an offer for $3.5–4 million. I'd love to play with you if you can match that. And then if we match that, he'll probably come back a week after that and tell us that we don't have the money to pay him. But I'm going to at least give it a shot with Caveman Arrieta. And I do like Juan Luis, and I'm not going to play around with him. He says he's looking for $140,000. Supposedly league interest in him is very low. But I'm going to go way over what he's looking for, at least in percentage terms, and offer him $200,000 to see if he'll consider joining us. Arturo Villarreal is a guy that I mentioned in the last episode, and YME943 kind of seconded that he might be worth going after since he's not looking for big-time money. In the interest of just kind of spraying money out there, we're going to overbid on him a little bit at $250,000 signing bonus. So we've got 3 offers out there right now to players that we really like, and we still have $2.05 million yet. Just a matter of figuring out where we might want to preemptively throw that. The thought is we're not going to get all of these guys. I think particularly Mr. Arrieta will ultimately be more expensive, but we're going to at least make a run at a few guys from the start and try to make it an incredible IAFA period, but it will likely not end up that way. I can't imagine we're going to get all these guys. And the last guy that we're going to put some money on is the center fielder David De La Fuente out of the Dominican. Solid everywhere. He's a switch hitter. He's got some good personality traits. If maybe we get a little more out of his bat than we think we would, which is something that YME943 suggested, could be a pretty useful player. He's looking for $1.5 million. We're not going to overbid on him like we have with the other guys. Want to maintain a little bit of financial flexibility. So we'll at least put an offer out there to him to get the discussion going. We'll see if $1.25 million will work, and he's at least willing to think about that. My hunch is that he's going to end up wanting more and coming back wanting more than that. But wanted to at least get one other discussion going, one other person that we can get feedback on. It looks like Villarreal, Luis, and Arrieta all favor the offer, and we are waiting to hear from Mr. De La Fuente. We'll start moving forward and see if maybe we can get 2 or 3 of these guys locked up over the next couple of weeks. And Luis Arrieta, not surprisingly, even though we overbid on him, has come back and said he's looking for more money. I tend to think, as I said, he's a guy who's going to go for fulfill, or possibly more than even we can pay. Actually, now he says he wants $4 million, so even more than he claimed in his email to us. 3.05 is the most that we can add right now, and he says he's not even willing to consider that. So we will at least temporarily pivot back, and I hate going so heavy pitcher, but want to at least see what Garza is thinking, because he is, if everything works out, an incredibly valuable player. With the fragility and with the fact that you're reliant on a curve and a changeup to develop and become his two best pitches, there is a even lower probability than a typical prospect with Garza that everything will work out, but still a potential big-time impact player if it does. Says he's looking for $2.2 million. We'll come in a little high at 2.25 and at least get the conversation going with Edgy Garza. And we did get our old farmhand Austin Britz signed to a contract. So he's listed as a minor league free agent signing here, but he's been in our organization for almost a decade now, since he was a scouting finding out of Australia in 2033. Out of options, so we don't want to guarantee a contract for him, since he would be, as he has been for the last 3 years, right on the border of someone who could make our major league pitching staff. But certainly with his pitching traits, his durability, good personality traits, and the fact he's been an extremely effective pitcher in his 3 years in AAA, we'll be very happy to have him back at that level for us and give us some insurance going forward. We did end up having to give him a minor league contract with a major league option at the major league minimum to get him signed, so he will have the opportunity if he wants to opt out after 30 days, but at least a little bit of insurance for us through spring training and the start of the season, and then we'll see what happens after that. Both Villarreal and Juan Luis have come back and said they want more money. Mr. Luis, not a crazy amount of money, says he wants $420. We'll offer him $450 and try to get him signed. Definitely higher on him than I am on Villarreal, just because if everything works out, Luis is a real special reliever, whereas if everything works out, Villarreal is probably a fourth or fifth starter. I mean, he is a lefty, but I don't think his stuff and his overall repertoire is quite as interesting. We do have the money to come in a little high on him also, so we'll throw $500,000 out there to Villarreal and see if perhaps we can still get a few of these guys signed. I think Arrieta is probably off the board for us right now, so it's 3 pitching prospects, but plus De La Fuente, who are really live for us as far as international amateur free agents at this point, only a few days into the IAFA period. And not surprisingly, the 2 more expensive guys, Garza and De La Fuente, have come back looking for more money. Garza, we're not going to be shocked if he ends up going for the max. Yeah, it says he's looking for $4.4 million. That's more than we can get to at this point. I'm almost more interested in going with maybe the 2 bargain pitchers, as much as I love Garza's ceiling. His floor is probably not all that great with his only 2 pitches at this point, and the fact that he's not that healthy. So I think I'm a little more interested in engaging with De La Fuente, just a pretty well-balanced all-around player. Again, you hope with the good coaching we have, plus his high work ethic, adaptability, and leadership, that maybe he develops into somewhat more than we think he can. We are only high scouting accuracy on him. The OSA, for what it's worth, sees a little more home run power and a little better eye in him than we do, but I would tend to think that our scout has it figured out better. He's still being pretty reasonable. Says 1.9 million, so we're going to offer him 2 million at this point. If we could get De La Fuente when all is said and done, as well as both Villarreal and Luis, that would not be a bad period. And it's conceivable we could get those three guys and still have a little bit of money to spend on some second-tier prospects if we hear from them in relatively short order. Would love to have 2 or 3 of them locked up within the next week by the 26th of January. Whether or not that will happen, we'll find out shortly. And De La Fuente yesterday said he loved our offer. Today he's looking for more money. Arrieta signed with Pittsburgh. Let's see how much he ended up going for. Yeah, $5.7 million. So we would have had to come up with an extra almost $1 million in trading for money from other teams to have a shot at him. I like him. He was definitely my most favored everyday player out there. But we're going to go for quantity over quality to the extent we can. David De La Fuente, let's see how bad the number is at this point. 3.2 million. So this might be our last shot at him. We'll go to 3.25. We still have got $500,000 available, which I want to keep. I do like both of those pitchers and really want to ensure that we hopefully get both of them, if not at the very least one of them. So if they come back before we've figured out things with De La Fuente one way or another, want to make sure that I can make a bigger offer to one or both of them as well. And Luis's number has been rapidly rising from the 140,000 he was looking for originally. He has been in very high demand. No surprise to DLL and Why Me. Says he's looking for 550 right now. We'll meet that demand, submit that offer to him, and try to get Wig signed. All right, some good news and some bad news. We've gotten one of the more bargain-oriented pitchers signed, the starting pitcher, Arturo Villarreal. He was kind of the higher floor, lower ceiling prospect, as we talked about. Durable lefty who could maybe be a 4th or 5th starter if everything works out. So bringing him on board for $500,000, don't feel bad about that at all. Juan Luis says he likes us. Luis Garza has signed with the Marlins. Let's see how much he ended up going for. Yeah, $5.7 million. So another guy that we really couldn't compete for. And unfortunately, David De La Fuente is looking for more money at this point. 3.8. We could do 3.7, but everything needs to really work out perfectly with him for him to be more than a really good 4th outfielder. Now, as I talked about, given the positive personality traits, it's conceivable that everything could work out well for him with the really good coaching and the high investment into player development he's likely to get over the next several years in the Buffalo organization. But before we keep bidding higher on him, I am inclined to want to get Juan Luis locked up. I really like his potential to be a frontline reliever. And as we talked about, there is a chance he could be a really good starter as well if everything fell into place. So I think I'm going to pause a bit and maybe look a little more bargain-oriented as far as some position players. And he may or may not be a bargain. He could be looking for as much as De La Fuente at this point. But Cody Angsley is a guy that we have a strong relationship with. He's another guy that YME943 viewed as a potential lottery ticket. Good work ethic and adaptability, decent range, not much speed, potentially useful bat, but not a great bat. Looking for 2.16 million, so he's more reasonable right now. We'll offer him 2.2. which will still leave us a lot of money to play around with. I think for, a million and a half less than De La Fuente, and the fact that we couldn't even reach that 3.8 million figure that David De La Fuente was going to go for. The best we could get was 3.7. I like De La Fuente a little better than Anglesey as a player, but at this point, I'd really love to get Luis to join Valerial as two interesting pitching prospects in our organization. So we've made it through the week we outlined to January 26th. Only have one player signed. Anglesey is now looking for more money as well. I'm going to kind of play it cool with both Anglesey and De La Fuente right now. I really want to get Luis signed, and if we are able to get him done, that'll make me feel a little better about maybe chasing whoever's available among position players at that point. I'm not so in love with De La Fuente or Anglesey that I'm willing to lose Luis by potentially chasing them with every penny we have, and then not being able to add a couple $100,000 extra in on Luis and potentially losing him to another team. And we did end up getting Juan Luis signed, so I really like him as a high-end relief prospect, and as we talked about, a guy who could be a really interesting starter if that changeup develops. Ended up costing us $550,000, so significantly more than the $140 that he was asking for. But we're still now in a situation where we can, as the preseason gets underway, use that money with other teams in trade, or perhaps make one final offer for one of the better players who's still available. Or another option is, of course, to spread that money a little bit around a little bit among the mid to lower tier prospects that are still available. And while I really like the two guys we've signed, I only spent $1.05 million on them, so still $3.7 million left to go. In retrospect, obviously that was not enough for Arrieta or Garza, two of the guys that we had been engaged in originally. I think Anglesey is still a guy that we'd like to try to get, but looks like he's got a max offer that we can't top at this point. I'm guessing David De La Fuente is going to be a similar situation. Yeah, $4.4 million. We can't do that, and I'm guessing that 3.7 is not going to excite him. So those two guys are kind of unrealistic for us. Mauricio Rayo, he's durable. He's a left-handed hitter with a little bit of pop. Not an incredible prospect, particularly given the lack of the speed and the very poor defensive traits. Also a guy that really don't even want to play in left field. See what he's looking for at this point. 1.78 million, not a huge number. We're not going to be able to trade away $3.7 million. Actually, we could trade away $3.7 million potentially. I am not willing to spend the next couple of hours in real life figuring out the best way to drip out $3.7 million to teams that are looking for a little more cash. So because of that, I am going to offer $1.8 million now to Mr. Rayo. Claims he wants more money right now. He's one of these quirky guys who are offering him more than what he even wanted, and he's unhappy with that for some reason. $1.85 million may get the job done. We're probably going to spray a little more money onto some lesser prospects right now. I'll let you know what happens with Rayo unless we find an incredible prospect that we haven't seen yet. Probably going to mercifully, for those who have been following this really closely, not spend too much more time in this episode talking about IAFA. Nelson Bellatine is a guy who I mentioned in the last episode. Kind of a Deshaun Seifu-esque profile without the world-class speed and without the great personality and without as much defensive skill. But he's a guy who's not looking for crazy money. And at least according to our scout, if everything were to work out, which it may not, given his personality, could be an interesting player. So we're going to offer him $900,000 as well. Don't know what's going to happen with these guys, but given that we really like the two pitchers that we got for a little over $1 million, going to try to bring in some of the second-tier position player prospects to bolster our team, or our international complex more accurately, on the position player side, as well as the pitchers that we added. And we've signed a couple of our bargain basement players. Cody Anglesly ended up with signing with Cincinnati, and he ended up signing with them for $5.3 million, so more than we had when all was said and done. We did ink a catcher, Sergio Moreno, a very borderline prospect, but only cost us $200,000. And then we also signed the first baseman, Mauricio Rayo, who's a bit higher end prospect, and we got him in for $1.85 million. So we've still got some money to spend, still going back and forth with Nelson Bellatine, as well as I think another other player or two. I guess the other shortstop, Silva, is a prospect out of Mexico. Decent defensively, decent personality, really question the hitting. So I think at this point we're going to try to maybe engage with Bellatine. And although we don't love the personality, the offensive profile, if he fully develops, is interesting. And at least, especially with that ability of him to switch hit, someone worth taking a flyer on, in my view. And we did end up getting Nelson Bellatine signed. He ended up going for $1.45 million, so not quite as much as the first baseman. Ended up spending a bit bigger money on some of the second-tier prospects, but feel like we're going to come out of this international amateur free agent period with a pretty versatile and balanced class. We talked about the two pitchers at the relative beginning, Valerial for $500,000, and then we added Luis for $550,000. Subsequent to that, we've added the three other players that I've talked about more recently: the catcher Moreno at $200,000, the first baseman Rayo $1.85 million, and then most recently the second baseman Bellatine at $1.45 million. So only $200,000 left at this point. Continue to see if there's anyone at the lower end that we can afford with that money. And if not, we've also been investigating the opportunity to maybe trade it away. So far, doesn't seem all that realistic. And I mentioned in previous episodes that in a perfect world, we'd love to bring a left-handed bat in to help us. So we've been keeping an eye on the market over the last month and a half or so since this episode started. Bobby Bolig, who we signed to a minor league deal a year ago and ended up coming up in the second half of the year for us, and is a guy who's been with us for a long time, still looking for $13.6 million. He's not a left-handed hitter, but Shamar Jenneret, a big-time player in the history of our organization, right-handed slugger, still looking for $13 million. Looks like he's kind of finally in a position where Father Time has caught up with him a bit. If he was willing to sign a minor league deal at some point, certainly wouldn't mind having him in the organization. But at this point, still about a week before the start of spring training, don't see there being anything for us to do. Another one of the left-handed hitters we had talked about, Jake Spring, still available. His number's down to $3 million. He's kind of a borderline-ish roster player for us at this point. He is a left-handed hitter, as we talked about, who's solid against right-handed pitching, but I don't think he's any better against right-handed pitching than some of the right-handed hitters we have, like Romero and Rojas, who are also sluggers. So I don't think we chase Jake Spring yet. Would love to have him in the organization, but would love to have him kind of at our price, which is likely a major league minimum contract or a minor league contract. Walt Miller, our former catcher, out there as well. Would love to have him as depth in AAA, given that he's still got a good glove, but certainly not a guy that we're going to make a major league offer to at this point. And Shamar Janaret did end up getting a pretty good deal for what he is at this point. The Rangers signed him to a 2-year deal, $11.3 million a year. As I said, we would have taken him on a bargain basement contract. Still a lot of positive personality traits, but he's awful defensively now, pretty slow, fragile physically. And last year he put up a 101 WRC plus at the age of 37, and he's 38 now. As you can see, hard to imagine that he's going to have anything similar to his glory years going forward. And we've made it to the start of spring training. Hopefully we can keep the team healthy. As usual, we're going to be going with 6 starters this year. Barajas, Lance, and Barbarito are experienced major league starters at this point, likely locked into the top 3 spots in our rotation. And we're going to take a look at Simeon Manelli, Chris Lott, a couple of youngsters who have come up through our system, as well as the veteran left-hander David Espinoza, who's always been a borderline starter for us and has typically ended up as a relatively useful left-handed arm out of our bullpen. We're also going to give Floyd Auclair the opportunity to be our stopper. Nate Ruckel, who was our stopper a year ago, back with us for possibly one final go-round. Important and high-paid lefty in the bullpen, and a guy who hopefully is some insurance for us if we do need to move Auclair back into the rotation when all is said and done. Ruckel, maybe some insurance at that stopper role where he's been pretty effective over the course of his Buffalo career, although he's admittedly coming off of a bit of an off year. Some interesting position players who are going to be around. Most notably, we are going to get a look at Danny Ferguson, last year's first-round draft pick. Never made it higher than high A ball a year ago. Probably going to start this year in Double A. Pretty hard to imagine we're going to promote him all the way to the major leagues. But the 22-year-old out of Delta State is not far off being in the mix for an infielder for us. If things go well with him this year, could certainly see him being a September call-up and potentially even an important player for us in the playoffs. But think that he'll be best served by getting a little more seasoning in the minors when the season begins. That said, we'll see what he can do. He's not going to be playing every day in spring training, but he'll be our shortstop against left-handed pitchers to try to get him a little bit of playing time, and we'll see what he's able to do for us this spring. And as spring training begins, we've made minor league offers to a few pitchers just to bolster the upper levels of our minor league system, give us a little bit of extra depth there if we can get some of them signed. Bobby Bolig's still looking for $11.6 million. Walt Miller still looking for $3 million. And he's only interested in a major league contract, so that's not something that we're interested in at all. Jake Spring still out there as a left-handed bat. We've talked about him. Don't know that he's a difference maker, but if we could stash him in the minors, would certainly consider doing it. And he's willing to do a minor league contract that becomes a guaranteed major league contract. More money than we really want to spend for him right now. But if it gives us the optionality to get him into camp and get the first 30 days of the year with him, it'll be similar to what we did with Bolig a year ago. Maybe he'll opt out. We would only spend that $2 million on him in an emergency if we really needed him. And he's willing to think about the $2 million at this point. So we'll submit an offer to Spring. maybe get him in camp for the next few weeks. Don't think we're going to end up putting him on the 26-man roster, but again, the optionality to have him in the organization as a break glass in the case of an emergency type player, given that he is a proven left-handed hitter who's a 3-time All-Star and a Silver Slugger winner, would not be the worst guy to have for some organizational depth in case we do have some injuries with our limited number of left-handed hitters at the major league level. And we're getting near the final days of spring training now, about a week and a half away from the start of the regular season. Just suffered our first material injury during the spring. The young second baseman, I guess he's not really that young anymore at 27 years old, Alejandro Contreras, out with a fractured finger for about a month. That could open up an opportunity for Ferguson. Still don't think he'll end up making the major league roster out of spring training at 22 with just less than a full season of minor league experience on his resume. But stranger things have happened. So an injury to Mr. Contreras will certainly be an opportunity for somebody, since Contreras was definitely going to be on the 26-man roster. And we've made it to the end of spring training now. Lost the final game in Florida, 3-2 to the Phillies. Contreras still about 3 weeks away from being able to play, so obviously he'll start the season on the IL, where we've already placed him. And Luis Palencia, the young pitching prospect that we signed to a long-term extension last year, still recovering from that ruptured UCL. He was fragile with his injury proneness before then. I think he could still be a pretty interesting major league starter, at the very least, hopefully a useful reliever for us. But we're not going to be seeing him for another 3 to 4 months. So hopefully he'll be at a point where he could pitch in the majors in September, maybe get a little rehab in the late summer in AA or AAA. Everyone else is healthy at this point, so now it's just a matter of making the difficult decisions to take this 53-man roster at this point down to 26. So more than half of the guys in spring training right now are going to be headed to the minor leagues when all is said and done. And the pitching staff is almost settled as we expected. A ton of depth here. We sent a lot of really good players down to AAA. Nelson Davia, the Rule 5 pick from a few years ago. The lefty Ben Borgian, we waived and DFA'd him. Hopefully he'll slip through. Austin Britz, who we re-signed in the offseason. Roberts, the good young prospect, also sent down. So feel like there is a good amount of depth in AAA if we have some injuries. This last decision is a difficult one. It really comes down to who has the options. And unfortunately for Chris Powers, who we picked up in the Rule 5 draft a year ago, had a nice year for us, 5-1 record with a 2.57 ERA over 49 innings pitched. But the 29, soon-to-be 30-year-old, still has 3 option years left. And one of the very few players in our bullpen who does have options. He may actually even be the only one at this point. So because of that, he's going to get sent down to AAA Albany, and that'll leave us with the 13 players who are going to go north for us. As expected, Barajas, Lance, and Barbarito going to be our top 3 pitchers this year. We, of course, moved on from Alexis Mendoza, our longtime starter in the offseason, when the fragile player who's heading into his 30s got a big free agent contract. And we've moved Floyd Auclair, who was a starter for us last year in his first year on the team, into a stopper role this year. So that's opened up opportunities for a couple of youngsters, the 24-year-old Chris Lott and the 25-year-old Simeon Minelli. Minelli is kind of similar to Auclair, doesn't have incredible stamina. We'll be interested in seeing what we can get out of the 25-year-old. Espinoza back as a left-handed reliever, and we're still going to clarify some of the bullpen roles. We know that Scott will be our closer, Auclair will be a stopper, Ruckel and Rivera likely will be the setup man, and then Sean Drawn, Robbie Farrell, Pat Cheek, and David Espinoza all will be back in middle and long relief roles for us. No starters, no left-handed starters in the rotation. 3 left-handers, Ruckel, Drawn, and Espinoza, will be working for us out of the bullpen when the regular season does finally begin. And we're down to our final couple cuts with our position players as well. You can see, according to our manager, Deshaun Seifu isn't going to be in the starting lineup. We'll talk about him shortly. He's definitely starting to have the age have an impact on him, as we knew would happen eventually, but he will be getting some playing time for us. Jimmy Dryden made it difficult on us. The 23-year-old former third-round pick has a pretty good profile, but he's only played 52 games in his career at the AA level last year, and we're not going to be playing him every day in AAA or every day in the majors. Granted, it doesn't look like, according to our scout, there's really much more development that's going to take place here, but he's got options left, 3 option years left since he was just added to the 40-man this past offseason. I'm going to give him a little bit of seasoning down in AAA, ensure that he can play every day. So that is one cut, and the final cut, which is going to be even more interesting, yet to be determined. And our final cut is not going to really be a big surprise, I don't think. But we're going to send down Eric Horst. You may remember him. He spent all of last year with Buffalo, only got 67 at-bats. Right-handed hitter with a little bit of speed, 2 for 2 on the base paths last year. Just doesn't bring much to the table defensively, and he still has 2 option years available. So we are going to send Horst down to AAA as well. And what that means is Jamie Zlato, the left-handed batter that we picked up in the Rule 5 draft, is going to make the team coming off the bench. He's never played in the major leagues yet. Pretty nice, interesting profile against right-handed pitching. Would be more interesting with that 70 gap power. I guess it is pretty interesting. His stealing and his base running aren't that good, but his speed is, and that's what's most important for that gap power. So feel like he could be an interesting left-handed bat off the bench. When Contreras is healthy, definitely his spot on the 26-man roster, and hence his spot in the Buffalo organization, will definitely be in jeopardy. But we're going to at least see what he can do at the major league level over these first few weeks of the season. We did end up in, we still haven't organized our minor league teams at all at this point. Going to be making some changes through these, but we did end up sending Jake Spring down. He's on that minor league contract with the major league option, so he can opt out after 30 days. Like having him around for a while as organizational depth. We'll see whether he opts out or not. We still potentially going forward could do something with Bobby Bolig. He's still demanding $11.6 million, and Walt Miller's still demanding $3.2 million. And they both at this point will still not consider minor league contracts. But if those 2 veterans and Buffalo veterans linger on the free agent market for much longer and are willing to accept minor league contracts, certainly would consider bringing both of them into AAA for some extra depth. And taking a look at our starting lineups, as he has been for closing in on 2 decades, Deshaun Seifu is going to be our leadoff hitter against both left and right-handed pitching this year. But he will be in a new role. One-time second baseman, has played mostly third base the last 2 years. We've trained him a bit at first base recently. But looking at our team, Mr. Seifu is now a designated hitter. We've got a recent scouting report on him. He's still an Iron Man as far as his injury proneness. Still very good speed and a very good base stealer, but he's starting to regress a bit there, closing in at 39 years of age. And you can see his defensive ratings have really started to deteriorate given his lack of speed. He's really a contact and speed guy at this point. Could certainly argue, and I think you could potentially even argue rightly, that he might not deserve, based on his current ratings, to be in our starting lineup against right-handed pitching. But with Mr. Seifu having led the National League in steals 15 consecutive years, having helped lead our team to the playoffs each of those 15 years, and being at this point just 79 hits away from the 3,000 hit club and less than 200 stolen bases away from passing Rickey Henderson for the top all-time mark, he deserves to be in the starting lineup until he proves us on the field that he's not capable of it, especially coming off of a year where he hit 286 with a 106 WRC plus, both of which figures were his best in the past 5 years. Could be very close to the end, admittedly, with Mr. Seifu. You may remember at the beginning of the offseason, we declined a team option we had for him, which I believe was $16 million, and we signed him back to a 3-year, $18 million deal with team options for both the second and third seasons. For the first time ever in this playthrough, and the first time with Mr. Seifu, could conceivably see a circumstance where this is his last year with us. But for the time being, he is still going to be playing every day and leading off for us. Against right-handed pitching, Ishmael Velasco batting second in center field. Coma Duran, Rojas, and Romero all back in the middle of the order. We are going to start Mitch Houlihan, who we brought back as our starting catcher against right-handed pitching, given that he is another left-handed bat. We are going to give Ramirez every third day against right-handed pitching, though, to ensure that the playing time is split not perfectly evenly, likely, but as evenly as possible among them. That will also give the fragile Romero, hopefully, the fragile Houlihan, hopefully, an opportunity to remain healthy. And then our third baseman, second baseman, and shortstop are going to be Medina, the new addition, Mike Whitehead, and Jim Andrews. Once Contreras is back and healthy, we'll have some interesting decisions to make. Could end up meaning that we move on from Zlato, but it also could mean that a Medina or a Whitehead ends up in the minors, since they do have options and someone will be short on playing time once Contreras is back. I think it's also conceivable that Contreras could end up in the minors as well. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. The only difference is, as far as who's playing against left-handed pitching, Josh Porter takes over as the right fielder for Luis Coma Duran. As we talked about, Juan Ramirez becomes the everyday catcher as opposed to Mitch Houlihan. Other than that, there are some people who are at different spots in the batting order against left-handed pitching, but it's all the same players otherwise. The left-handed Jamie Zlato and the left-handed hitting Edgar Canales are going to be our two players off the bench who, with this right-handed heavy lineup, will hopefully get some opportunities to pinch hit, particularly once Contreras is back and we, in theory, may have a little more defensive flexibility in the infield. Would expect that Canales could get some more playing time then, and Zlato potentially as well, assuming he's still on the roster at that point. And we've now made it to opening day. Ownership expects us to make the playoffs. We would love to do that for a 16th consecutive season and also expect that as well. Taking a look at where we sit financially, we do have some extra money available now. So we're going to boost our scouting up to $17.5 million. And our player development back up to $38 million. that still does give us some flexibility to potentially take on some contracts as the season moves along, and it also gives us the built-in flexibility to pay a little bit more to some players when we get to the draft, and also potentially even bring up from AAA if need be Jake Spring as a left-handed hitter. Although, as I mentioned, right now we've got a couple of left-handed bats off the bench in the minor leagues. So before we finish up the episode, we're actually going to knock scouting up one more little bit. Another $500,000 poured into scouting to get that to $18 million for the season, if I can type properly. Take a look at the preseason predictions here before we finish things up. In the American League, the Guardians, who were the top winning team in baseball a year ago, 103 wins expected for them. Taking a look at the National League, we are expected to win the National League East, but only 93 wins, which would be our lowest total in a while. You can see, as usual, expected to have a pretty good pitching staff with 615 runs against, but that won't be quite as good as it has been in some recent years. Taking a look at the top hitters, not surprisingly, nobody on the Buffalo list expected to be among the top hitters. Floyd Auclair expected to have a real big year as our stopper, though. They expect him to pitch 90 games, 139 and 2/3 innings, with a ridiculous 221 strikeouts in this simulation. So if we get anything close to that, we'll be saying thanks again to those of you who suggested that as a potential option for us to consider for this upcoming season. You know, we'll have to see how the pitching staff holds up. Lott and Manelli are basically making their full-time major league debuts at this point, so certainly could get some interesting performances from them that may ultimately necessitate an Auclair or an Espinoza perhaps moving back into the rotation. But we will cross those bridges if necessary, when necessary. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.